Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Rethinking Porn Addiction. This is episode 17, I think. Sometimes I lose track, but today I went back and looked, and I think we've done 17 episodes. That's great, and I'm really happy about that. So thanks to Jake and Hans and Kristen and Doug for being here for the last 20-some-odd weeks to do these 17 episodes. It's been so much fun for me. For those of you who are just tuning in, I'm Sick Nate. That is why I have a congested voice right now. And I'm on the top row of the video. If you're watching on video with Hans and Jake, we're your average Joes who have a history with pornography. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. That's the best way to describe us. Down below, we've got Kristen and Doug, who are both clinicians who have spent many, many years working with people, specifically men in Doug's case, who deal with out of control sexual behavior, as it's called. And much of that can revolve around or relate to experiences with pornography. And I think it's worth calling out. Jake and Doug are clinicians, or excuse me, Doug and Kristen are clinicians, and Kristen and Jake are married, and the rest, and we're all friends.
And I've not done this, but I do want to add one more thing to Doug, because Doug has worked with people over his lifetime. He has literally reshaped the industry or the approach, and we're all having this conversation because of the pioneering work that Doug had and then was able to try out over his decades long of providing it. And I want people to know that his book is amazing, and if there's clinicians that need a resource that want to view it as out of control sexual behavior from a different lens, it is his book and the Harvey Institute. Yes. Go there. It's amazing. And
so Doug co-authored the book with Michael Vigorito, Treating Out of Control Sexual Behavior. Great book.
I just happened to have a copy.
Oh, good.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Kristen, because I think Doug's presence has always been a little understated on this show. And I know that's part of Doug's MO. Like, he doesn't like to draw attention to himself. He likes the focus to be on the top row on this show. But I think it warrants it's his perspectives and experience are so important, not only to the industry, but to this show being successful, that I love that you called that out. So,
yeah.
Thank you for your generosity, Kristen. And now on to why we're here.
Why are we here, Doug?
We're here because there's three men who speak to us in such honest and open ways, and it means a great deal to people who hear the conversations that go on in this room.
And today we're going to talk about something a little special, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
I'm so excited for this conversation.
Are you?
I am.
After our last conversation, we were kind of having a little a breakdown. And one of the things that we realized is that between me, Jake, and Hans, or Jake, Hans, and myself, we all kind of disclosed our porn use to our partner in different ways. And maybe we should start by talking about that, like what those different ways were. Does that feel like a good place to start?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's
it. Start, Hans?
Why don't I start? All right. So maybe just backstory. I feel like I was a fairly average teenager. I was raised, obviously, in the conservative Mormon culture that we've talked about a lot. My attraction to sexual imagery and porn started at a teenage age, I guess, adolescent age, and continued off and on for seasons through the rest of my life. And part of that life was getting married to Cammie, and probably 4 or 5 years into our marriage, maybe not that long, maybe it was shorter. I came home one day from work, I believe, and found her very distressed and in tears and an emotional state, having found pornographic images on my laptop at home. And we had some very difficult and poignant and emotional conversations thereafter that were very also healing. So in my case, it wasn't something that we talked about before she flat out discovered that I was using or viewing pornography and sexual imagery without her knowing. And so in her case, it was a shocking discovery. And I think...
Hans, can we back up? Was it a shock to you that she discovered what was on your computer? I mean, we know it's a shock to her. What was it? What was the feeling for you?
The feeling for me was great question, Doug. The feeling for me was a lot of sadness for having caused the pain that I was witnessing in Cammie. And there also was a component of relief for myself of, okay, maybe I don't need to hide this now, and I'm tired of living a double life, basically. And so there was a component of me being able to take a long exhale, which was nice. And I am very fortunate that I have an amazing partner who was willing to talk about it and work through it and figure out what it meant for me and our relationship and going forward.
How long had you guys been married at this point?
I'm going to try and recollect. We were married, I would guess, 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
And we had dated 2 years before we got married. So it was basically 4 to 5 years into our relationship where it really became came into full light for her.
Had you had kids yet?
No, we didn't have any kids at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I will do the same thing here.
I'm comfortable if you do or don't. I'm happy. I thanks, Nate.
No. I'm just very curious to know if you can it's at your comfort level, kind of describe the moment of her finding out, so that if there's a little bit more of a clear picture of kind of how it went down.
I came home, I think, if I recall correctly, I came home. It was quiet. There was no explosion as soon as I walked in the door. I think I found her in our room. I could immediately tell that she was distressed, had been crying. And a lot of her emotion was more, I won't say more. A lot of her emotion was confusion and uncertainty, and I think just the bearings of our relationship, and I'm putting words into what she was experiencing now, but
I want to know what's going on in your body while she's experiencing that.
In my body, a lot of fear of, oh no, what has my habit or use of pornography done to our relationship? And an immediate dose, and I can still feel it talking about it right now, of holy shit, this is serious, and I have done this terribly wrong, and I am in a bad spot, and I don't know where it will go from here.
Would you call that scared?
Yeah.
Okay. It sounded that way.
Yeah. Thanks. If I didn't use the word scared, yes, I was scared of what it meant for our relationship. And
now, let me just give you a cue. I've sat in rooms with men for 30 years. Men are very good at telling you what scared thinks like, sounds like, but they don't typically say, they don't just jump right out of the gate and say, I was really scared.
Really scared?
It's not something men, I notice, just sort of just say.
Yeah.
But
That's
so I just wanted to see if that was what you were describing.
Yeah. And I can still feel it in my body. Just talking about it right now, I can feel the tightening of my chest and the shortness of my breath and the tenseness that went along with that moment.
Thank you.
So while I'm rolling, other questions? I'm happy to, if there's other questions of interest, or Nate and Jake, I'm really interested to hear how your situations.
Let's play popcorn. Why don't you pick who goes next?
Nate, why don't you go next? I know you're lower energy, so maybe Jake and I can bookend. And
oh, that's a great idea. I'll be the boring in the middle of the energy sandwich. So my immediate recollection of like disclosing my porn use in a relationship like this was actually the one that comes to mind first. Isn't Angeline, my wife? I was actually engaged before I met Angeline.
Yeah.
And the girl I was engaged to, I remember very distinctly the moment that I told her that I had struggled with pornography. We had just gone swimming at one of her relatives' houses, and it was like a hot summer day, and the sun had set, and we were like getting ready to head back home. And I had been thinking about it for a long time. Like, look, I want to go into this marriage like with a really clear conscience, with everything on the table. I don't want any secrets, but that meant I had to like share my past struggles or my current struggles or whatever with her. And I remember like standing next to her car and saying, "There's something I want to talk to you about," and like looking up at the sky and taking deep breaths and feeling sick to my stomach and like trying to force the words out. And finally I was like, look, I have a history, like off and on, looking at pornography. And it's not something I'm proud of. It's something that I'm like trying to deal with. And she was just like, that doesn't surprise me. And I was like relieved instantly. And she's like, you know, we ended up having a conversation about it, but she didn't overreact. She didn't freak out. And in that moment, I just felt this like immense sense of relief. And it gave me confidence. That relationship ended up, we never got married. The engagement got called off. But in the future, like that was a gift that she had given me. And when I got serious with Angeline, I was less resistant towards just sharing that from the get-go. And as we got more serious, I was just really transparent with her. There was still definitely some shame involved. And like, it's still not something that I'm proud of. But it's something.
What part? What's the part you're not proud of?
Doug, how come you ask questions like this that make us like probe into our, that's a great question. What part was I not proud of? I know at the time, the part I wasn't proud of is that I was looking at sexual imagery.
Got it.
Like
important at the time, that's what you were not proud of.
That I found pleasure in something that conflicted with my values.
Yeah.
And that I sought it out regularly. Well, see, I even feel the need to like clarify how regularly, because I'm afraid that anybody watching might think that like I'm some sort of sex fiend that looks or looked at pornography like 6 times a day. And it feels a lot better to say, well, no, it was like, you know, once or twice a month, or, you know, like there's this still a temptation to want to downplay it, be like, yeah, but it's not as bad as other people, or as bad as you might jump to the conclusion to.
So you're also pointing out something really important I see a lot, Nate, and that is there's sort of these ideas that will rescue you from judgment. And so if I quantify it in just the right way, maybe I won't be judged as much.
Right.
And you know, it's almost like prunes. It's 6 too many and 2 too little. You know, we all have this algorithm. You know, if I did it this much, you won't hate me or shame me as much as if I do it this much. Right. And you're imagining what that equation is for the person.
Right. It's like I heard this analogy. I read about it online this weekend, and somebody said, like, what if you took a heap of sand, and that heap of sand is like 500,000 little granules of sand, and then you remove one granule, and it's 499,999, and then you remove one granule, and you keep removing that like one granule from the pile. At what point does the pile stop being a heap? Like, you might get down to 3 granules, and we can all agree that 3 little grains of sand is not a heap. But is there like a certain number where the heap becomes something that's not a heap anymore? And like, it's a conceptual idea. And I think all of us have this conceptual idea of what's problematic when it comes to sexual behaviors or sexual urges. And we all have our own idea of like what might be normal. And typically, I've heard Kristen say this many times, that the person who's labeled the sex addict by a therapist is the person who has like the sexual urges, desires, or fantasies that are uncomfortable for the therapist. Is that I'm not somewhere that doesn't sound as catchy as I've heard it said before. But what's the
well, I think you're just stumbling upon is who gets to determine that. When we're looking at this subjectively, depending on who's the definer, who gets to declare it, and that's where I think Doug's work gets you to the principles, so that. Yeah.
So anyway, to kind of tie this all up, I disclosed my porn use at the very beginning of the relationship before I tied the knot. But when I did disclose, I felt the need to definitely like not diminish, but like clarify and explain that it's not as bad as you would think, if that makes sense. I wanted to diminish the severity as much as possible so that I could feel accepted and give myself the highest likelihood of being accepted and loved, despite I wanted my problem to be mild, not severe.
Out of curiosity, were you trying to elicit safety then in Ange, that she could be like, that you were not that bad, that she could feel safe in your relationship with it?
Yeah, I think I was trying to make her feel safe. I think was trying to protect my self-image.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to be seen as like some sort of monster or some sort of like somebody that could become a predator or that could be abusive. Yeah. I think a lot of it, some of it had to do with the safety, but if I'm really honest, I think more of it had to do with me like wanting to preserve my image.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you could either say you're trying to preserve your image or you're trying to not have a new one given to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because that you could be given an identity of this is a really honest man who has good values and doesn't want to be deceptive to me when I get married. That could have been a perception you had. But the perception you were worried about was that you were going to be perceived as a dangerous and unpredictable and perhaps menacing man when it comes to his sexual life.
Yeah. I recently finished reading a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Donald Glover, Dr. Donald Glover. And one of the things he talks about is how typical nice guys are raised to be people pleasers. They're raised to make other people around them comfortable and happy and to be needless and wantless. And I think that pornography for me was a way for me to meet my needs or desires without having to go through the discomfort of making a request from somebody else and inconveniencing them or asking for something that might not be appropriate. And my way of dealing with pornography, I think, revolved a lot around the idea of wanting, like, I hid it and tried to diminish it because I wanted to be liked and I wanted to be accepted and I wanted to make everybody happy. And I didn't want to stir the pot too much. So if I had to stir the pot, I wanted it to be as minimal as possible. And part of what a nice guy does is he does anything that he can to maintain his image as a nice guy. And oftentimes he'll resort to like deceptive and manipulative tactics to do that. And I definitely think that my treatment plan for dealing with sexual imagery in the past revolved a lot around deception in order to preserve my reputation and my image, my public image.
I really appreciate you saying that before we get to Jake, because I think you're making an important distinction here. You're saying actually the motivation for that kind of deceptive behavior wasn't only and specifically because you were just looking at sexual imagery. It was the perception of you and how it would change because that was known. It seemed to be more significant than I turn my computer on and I look at this image and I do certain things and it feels good. That wasn't as much as the central conflict for you.
Well, and you have to realize, like, the image that I had cultivated throughout my entire life was that of the golden boy. Like, I don't know what other word to use to describe that, but like, I was always like a leader in the youth groups in my church. I was, I was always doing the right things. I was memorizing all the scriptures. I had the right friends. My friends never got into like drugs or alcohol. They weren't partiers in high school. Like I was the kind of guy who, like, my idea of a fun time on a weekend was going to an a cappella concert or having like Oreos and juice at my friend's house while we watched The Emperor's New Groove. Like that was a wild time for us, and like,
do golden boys have orgasms?
not until they're married.
Okay, I just was curious when golden boys get to have their body do that. So
Right.
that's great.
So you just check all the boxes. You obey all the rules. You meet all the expectations. Everybody always looked at me, and I was kind of my family and friends kind of talked about me in such a way that they wanted other people to, like their kids or my younger siblings, to grow up and be like me, because I was setting the example of what a good person was. And I actually didn't even truly start looking at sexual imagery until I was probably like 21. I was obviously like curious about women and their bodies when I was in my teens, but I never really I never went into beyond anything like a Sears catalog or Victoria's Secret pictures or a girl in a bikini. And I don't know if I would consider that necessarily. I guess it could be sexually explicit, depending on who you are. But I don't think
it sounds like it was pleasurable.
It was pleasurable for sure, but it didn't. I don't think it became anything that was like truly worrisome to anybody in my life or myself until I was like in college and off on my own.
Nate, thanks for sharing, man.
Yeah. Any questions? I talk a lot, I know.
I think you intoned it. You didn't say it outright, but it sounded like when you first disclosed to the girl to whom you were engaged, it did not immediately end the relationship at that point.
No.
And I think I just wanted to give voice to that because, well, I'll just say for myself, I'm curious if you felt the same, and I'd love to hear what Jake says also. But when I was discovered, or when Cami discovered my use of porn, that for me seemed to be a very real possibility of what could happen with our relationship.
Yeah. I was worried about it.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge that, I guess, for people that are listening, that all three of us have felt the fear of that, and that could have been an outcome of these discoveries or disclosures. I think it just feels important to me that we give voice to that can be an unfortunate outcome, and just recognizing that is unfortunately a really difficult situation, and part of why I think we feel the pain about it.
Definitely. Okay, Jake, hot potatoes to you.
Jake?
I was almost inclined to let Kristen tell her side of the story, but
let me just quickly say, I sent Jake a text saying, because he's the one here sharing his story with his partner, and I sent a text saying, I promise I will not hijack or interrupt your story, that you have the safety in being able to share your story without my interpretation. So there will be nothing from me. It is your experience.
Okay. Well, fun. So I was not the golden boy at all. And I don't know how much history you want, but I was discovered like Hans. I was not a discloser. Although I think, and as Chris and I have talked about this more and more, it started, I felt more and more distant towards Chris and these other things. And then I don't like keeping secrets. I'm not particularly good at it. I don't like the way I feel inside. And so my behavior became riskier and riskier in terms of me leaving stuff open, right? Like I didn't want to disclose, and I was terrified of being discovered, but I also absolutely hated the dishonesty and some of the other things. I am naming them now retrospectively. At the time, I was just going for it. kind of hearkening back to what Hans said about the relationship aspect of it, I was more or less under the impression that if I was a pornography user, that would be the end of our relationship. More or less, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And that continued to put a lot of pressure on me. And so there was this thing where, okay, this is pleasurable. And I also was coming at it more, it's hard to understand, but I was actually coming at it as well from a curiosity standpoint. I was under the impression that I should probably know a lot more about sex than I did, or about bodies, or about anything. And I had no education whatsoever. So for me, there was a lot of like curiosity, right? It was definitely pleasurable, but it was also educational to a certain extent, like the wrong kind, but that's honestly what I was going for. And so I can still remember vaguely the circumstances around it. I've got kind of a bad memory. I remember I left my phone open and I had an email. And was I out of town, or was I in the shower?
You want me to? What?
Let's not, Jake.
Interject.
It's more important to tell your story, and there doesn't have to be an agreement on the facts.
Okay. So all I remember is her coming out, or was me coming out, and her being like, "What is this?" And I was, couldn't remember, couldn't really do anything. And then, truthfully, that's where the story kind of goes dark, because I just don't remember it. I think at that point in time, I had entered fight or flight, and I was just holding on. And I can tell you that instance in particular, at least what my mind and body recollect from then, was this feeling of dread and relief. And it was equal. The dread was not necessarily from being discovered, although I did feel bad of like, oh, this, I've been taught this makes me a bad person. So this, now my wife knows I'm a bad person. But there was also this really sweet relief of, I don't have to carry this shit anymore. Like this does not have to be weighing me down constantly. Yeah. Because it did get to a point where like I would interact with Chris, and I mean, it's not like I was growing like crazy in my deception or anything, but it was always there and always present. And I didn't realize how big of a relief it would be until she discovered it. And it was like, okay, come what may. If we get divorced, whatever, like I'll be destroyed, but there is another chapter to this story. And I went back and I was trying to think about that feeling of this dread and relief that I felt when I was listening to Nate and Hans's stories. And you talk about the hiding. Nate, you mentioned the word hiding. And I think for me, what ultimately I was trying to hide is from the judgment of others. All right, that's where my hiding was coming from shame and all these other things. But when I've cleared, all the teachings and everything else away, and the shame started to make amends with that, it really comes down to this fear of not being accepted, particularly not being accepted by Chris. That was the thing that I was most scared of probably than anything else in my life. And because my usage with pornography and sexual imagery was a conflict with the standards that we had set in our marriage, or had been given to us, I think more appropriately, that I was in violation of those. So therefore, our relationship would be over. And there would be this separation between the two of us. And that was really hard for me.
Jake, I feel your story as I've been listening. I feel it in my chest.
Hans is like there.
I was there in spaces. I'm curious, had you already gotten to a point where did you have conscious thoughts at the time of when Chris finds out my relationship with her is over? Do you recall at all?
that was the foregone conclusion. And we had acquaintances where you hear the horror
Similar
stories.
things had happened.
And we had the horror story friends, right? And so then any conversations at all around pornography was, did you hear what happened to da 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 da? And if that ever happened to us, or I'm so grateful that's not us. And it was me going, yeah, oh boy, you know.
What you mentioned, the thing you were most afraid of is being rejected by Kristen, not accepted by her.
Yeah, and breaking up the family. And I mean, that's probably paramount, right? It's sort of this whole cone of fears, pyramid of fears. And that base level through probably the, 10th floor was the thing that I had worked so hard for or wanted most in my life was this family unit. And I had destroyed it because I was too weak.
Okay.
One of the things I hear each of you saying in a different way, whether you disclosed or it was discovered, you carried an idea that when this became known, it risked something dying. That it would die. It would be dead.
Doug, can I add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
It's not something. It's the most important thing.
Okay, thank you. The most important thing would die.
I think Hans, Jake, and I would all agree that the most important thing to us in our lives are probably our wives and our families.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like that's number one.
Yeah.
Knowing these two guys, I'm speaking for you, but like if you were to hold a gun to my head and I had to save like one thing in the world, it would be my wife and my kid. And the idea of losing that because exactly what Jake said, I wasn't strong enough, or I was too weak, or I was too selfish. Like, I'm sick to my stomach just thinking about it. But that's absolutely the narrative. So it's not just anything that's on the line. It's the most important thing.
And I think we were also dealing, at least for me particularly, like we were dealing in sort of a world of absolutes back then. It was you are an addict or you're not. And this was not considered sexually healthy or normal in the community that I was raised in. It was considered all the adjectives that Nate just used of you're weak, you're craven or amoral or all of these other things, and you identify with those labels because those are the labels readily available for you. And there's not a single positive label around pornography or
not even positive
or masturbation
around it. There's no conversation to seek understanding. There's no empathy. There's nothing except negativity around that conversation.
Because I know for every Nate story where he was talking to his fiance and he's saying, you know what, I've got this, and I'm like, this is a thing. And she's like, okay, that doesn't surprise me, no worries. There's 10 stories for guys that are like, and then she broke up with me.
Yep.
And so it's just a different time. And it was brutal. I mean, we had tons of conversations, and they were slow and really icy at first. And then I have to credit Kristen because she started to expand her way of thinking, and it also started to challenge her way of thinking when it was discovered of, the line that we drew in the sand. Was that a line that we were really drawing in the sand, or was that a line that was in the sand that was given to us by others? And now we were faced with, what do we do here? And we also went to sexual addiction treatments, which were almost further damaging to me and my progression. Knowing what I know now, there's no way I should have been there. And I met some great people there, but it also was like not my thing. So, and I didn't know what else to do, right? Because where I was, you you are an addict, now you have to treat this. There was no middle line. There was no middle ground. It was nothing. So that's, I'll hot potato to whoever now.
So the other thing I just want to acknowledge that happened in the room here was this negotiation about who owns the story. Because there's this idea that there is only one story. And the reality is there's always two.
Yeah.
And so when in these situations, when there's this pressure to have the story and the facts line up, I think it does a disservice, because each person in the situation will have their memories, their experiences, what it means to them, what they felt. And that means they're going to have a different story than the other person. And so I really appreciated what the viewers got to watch here, Kristen. You so generously offered to Jake, was that, we wanted to hear his story.
Yes.
And that's what's important here, not that it's the same story.
Yeah.
And if you listen to our stories, I just want to add this as we're doing it, where Jake's story ends, because that was kind of the emotional crescendo. That's where a lot of his emotions were rooted. My story begins, and that's where my emotions began and my recollection. And I've really enjoyed just what other place would I get to just sit here and listen as an observer to Jake's honest recollection without me trying to shape his recollection of it. Mm-hmm. It's I'm enjoying this a lot.
Mm-hmm. And what a great way to model what it could look like for a couple.
Not the first disclosure. This is not what it looks like. I think that I really want to honor the work. And
I appreciate you clarifying
that this is an outcome of many, many things.
But just having a sexual health conversation, being able to sit back and be curious and just enjoy listening to your partner's perspective without needing to interject or moralize, or I don't know. I think it was great to watch that as well.
There's just one other thing I want to add, that Doug, you said there's always two stories. I think in our communities, and what I heard from all of them is possibly when other people hear, there's possible multiple stories of like people making an idea then of like who Jake and I are now because of this, and the pressures, and it's just a lot of pressure to have so many people having their story or lock you into that narrative of whatever theirs is. I'm going to get my minor out of the room. I'll be back.
Thanks. So I'm just curious then, when you listen to each other's different stories, we have disclosure and we have, discovery in the room. What's it like to hear? I was just wondering, what's it like for the three of you to hear all this? Because I don't think men sit around and have these conversations. Let me tell you about my disclosure. Let me tell you about my deception, being discovered. So what was it like to just sit and hear each other and ask each other questions?
Personally, I felt the emotion, like as each of the stories were told, I felt in myself the emotion that I had as I was going through that also. Mm-hmm. Doug, what you said about not having opportunity or avenues or outlets to talk about this as men, white, middle-aged, conservative men that we are.
You call them middle-aged.
We call them conservative.
Well, I got the white part and the cisgender part right.
Cisgender.
Give credit for that, all right?
That's one of the things that I think about the most as we've done this Rethinking Porn Addiction show is I love the idea of trying to give people, and I think we're trying to do that in this podcast format in some small way, the opportunity for people just to feel like they have that connection in some small, minor degree. Jake and Nate, I love the fact that you guys are comfortable enough to share with me and us in the room here, and everyone's watching or listening. And I am personally very grateful for that. That's one of the greatest gifts I think I have in life, is those outlets to be able to have those kind of conversations. And I would love to be able to help others figure out how to do that or find those for themselves also, because it's beyond value in my life.
And I mean, I know the time I was going through this, there was no way I could find two people who had gone through the discovery route and things worked out really well. You know, all things considered at the end, it was for the benefit of the relationship and the couples. There was no examples of that. And there was definitely not an example of someone who disclosed, like actively disclosed.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, regardless of what happens in your individual relationship, just knowing that there are people out there where this actually worked out okay. And I think there's probably a lot more when you're dealing with people that are committed to the relationship and being honest and following those sexual health principles, that the story, and you're still always going to have the stories with the unhappy endings.
Yeah.
But there are definitely more stories of people with happy endings, I think, as well. And at the time I went through it, there was none. There was no stories.
I want to give a different sentence to a happy ending or a good ending. I think when the relationship ends, one person or both had another relationship that was eventually in their hearts more important than the one of the person they were with.
Hmm.
And it may have been with their God. It may have been with their religious community. It may have been with their values. I don't know what it is. But it's another way of thinking about that, that not everybody centers the most essential relationship in their world with the life partner they currently have.
Yeah.
They may have another relationship that they see as more central and enduring and essential to who they are as a person on the planet. And that's a motive some people have for making this choice.
Yeah.
I love that, Doug. I've got a question for Jake and Hans. What in hindsight, are you glad that your partners finally found out, and like, is your relationship better because you've learned to navigate this differently than you were before, which was keeping it a secret?
For me, 1000%.
Okay.
It was acidic to me. That's the best way to describe it. It was just slowly eating away at me and who I was towards her, towards others. There was so much shame baked into it, and when I go through shame, I want to run and hide.
Yeah.
And I don't try to overcompensate. I try to just hide. And so I was this in particular, the dishonesty, the deception, the sort of not knowing what I was or where I stood or how good or bad. It's weird to think about that now, but that's really where I was, that was taking so much of my energy and just consuming it. And so it was consuming me.
So, and Hans, I want to give you a chance to answer too, but I kind of want to amend my question a little bit. I think the ultimate thing I'm curious about is, do you feel like your relationship is better now than it was before? And if so, how?
I love the question, Nate, and I'm glad. I think it's awesome that you took it this direction. I was maybe going to try to suggest that we go this way with the conversation. What Doug said about partners potentially having another relationship that was ultimately more important, whether that's with God or faith or community or whatever that might be. I'm stumbling through some words here because I think it's the first time I've ever tried to say it in this manner.
You're good.
But part of me wants to almost shout from the rooftops how important I feel it has become to try to find that honesty about who I am and about myself and not live in those kind of deceptions. Like the relationship that I have with Cammie is amazing. And it's also only as amazing as I am willing to be honest in that relationship and vice versa. And so to your amended question, yeah, I can't imagine having lived 40 or 50 years or 60 or however long we might have lived with that deception continuing that entire time. That for me is like overwhelmed. Like I'm getting emotional just thinking. That is so overwhelming to think about. And so I'm feeling a lot of emotion because of the conflict and tension that I'm feeling about trying to encourage people to go through that process of being honest with themselves and being honest with their partner, and also knowing the fear and the difficult pain that can come from that. But yeah, Jake said it. I think I would say the same thing, that at some point, the weight of carrying that deception would have compounded even worse and worse and worse. And I don't know where it would have led, but it would have been even worse emotional trauma and difficulty than I had experienced up to that point. And I am really grateful that I was able to get to that point, even though it was just through discovery with Cammie. But I am grateful that I am able to be honest with her now, and we have that in our relationship.
Thanks, Hans.
Yeah.
I mean, I would echo that. Our relationship before was never 100%. There was never an opportunity for it to be 100%. When I mentioned how, for me, the fear that I was feeling was this fear of being accepted, it's also true, and I didn't find this out till later, that I couldn't be accepted. Right? I could not be accepted by Chris fully until she fully knew who I was or how I was. And it was, I mean, it wasn't always that way. It's very important for me to clarify that. There was a lot of figuring it out, and I'm just finally learning how to read the little comments thing. But someone asked if there was separation or any of that stuff involved. There was definitely sleeping in the basement for a long time.
Was it a bed or a piece of furniture?
I think it was a couch. We had a guest room.
It was a futon.
It was a futon, I remember.
Yeah. That futon sucked. See that, and that's where, and I guess that's the thing. When I was going, okay, so pre-discovery, it was like, if she ever finds out, everything's over. And then she finds out, and we're trying to, things are settling. We're trying to figure it out. And then it was like, this is terrible. This is rough. It will never get better. It will never get better. And now looking back on it, years removed, I don't even remember the awful futon. I remember that, it was there and it occurred, but I don't remember all the specifics, even though that was such a huge, momentous part of my life. What I do remember is the chance to grow close to Chris and to have conversations that were so hard. And truthfully, for me, to sort of never give up, right? To never, I think, this might be way personal and sort of off topic here, but when Nate said all of us on the top row would say that our families and our wives are the most important things to us, and we all nodded our head and agreed. When I was caught or discovered or whatever else, that's when it gave me a time to put my money where my mouth was, to really show Chris that she was the most important thing to me, and that I would continue to fight and figure it out. And figuring it out looked differently a couple different times, but I was willing to put in the effort, and I was willing to try to right the wrongs and be open and honest and communicate. And now that's what I think of as our relationship. I don't think of me sleeping in the futon or going to some of these group sessions and truthfully being kind of uncomfortably scared, right? Not just scared, but sort of uncomfortably scared. And I don't recall, I know there was lots of heated discussions or very passionate discussions. And I don't recall necessarily content, but I recall coming through the other side and hugging Chris fully and having her hug me back fully. And that sort of makes all of the crap that we went through beforehand and all the struggle and kind of the enduring aspect just made it all that much sweeter and worth it.
Can I ask something about maybe exploring? As you've been talking, Jake, I've been wondering and I've been feeling myself, so maybe I'm just saying this selfishly, but I'm curious if you guys had this same experience or not. When I was discovered, or when it was discovered with Cammie, I feel like I feel like it was also the first time when I could fully live with myself also. Like we've talked a lot about our relationships and how discovery or disclosure was important to those and saving those. A really important part of my journey was that I was actually able to be honest with myself for the first time and accept myself for who I was and to be okay with that. And Jake, when I heard you say that Kristen hugged you, I don't know why, but I just have this image in my mind of you being able to forgive and to love yourself also, and that being a really important part of this discovery or disclosure process also. Do you guys feel that also? I'm just curious of your thoughts.
For sure.
I think that is one of the most sort of subtle blessings in all of this, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if blessings right word, or discovery or whatever is, the ability to sort of love yourself and be okay with yourself and accept yourself. When I talk about that acid, I think that was definitely a portion, a component of the acid, was that I wasn't good with me.
Yeah.
Not by.
Oh, I hated myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very astute observation.
Yeah.
I haven't really thought about that before.
I have a cool saying I heard a while ago and I feel bad I've forgotten the name of the poet or the author, but the saying was, love yourself, then forget it, then love the world. And
Mary Oliver.
Yeah, there you go, Mary Oliver. Thanks. I don't know that I was able to love myself and fully live with myself in that kind of deception. Like I said earlier, I was living two lives. So I personally was not being congruent with myself. Mm-hmm. And getting to that place of congruency with myself was essential and happened for me kind of simultaneous with Cammie because she discovered it. Nate, I admire you, man, for having been ahead of the game in some ways and saying, dude, I got to get straight with myself and getting straight with yourself about where you were at, and then also being able to introduce that into the relationship. I didn't get to that
much credit. Serious, because I think a large part of it was that I wanted to control the narrative. And there was a sense of relief in being able to control the way that she found out.
Yeah.
And that gave me a little bit less anxiety. It also gave me more permission to screw up in the future. I told you that this is something I struggled with. Shouldn't be a surprise, there's a sense of relief in that as well. It's not all noble.
I really like what the group is doing right now in your discussion. You're taking the superiority out of disclosure or discovery, as if somehow one is better than the other. They're just two different ways people move into this conversation that's been avoided for decades or years by people in suffering.
I think it's also worth pointing out, Doug, now that you've said that this is only one aspect of the narrative that we have, and we've done this in many of our episodes. Like, this is a very male-dominated conversation.
Yeah.
And we haven't given much voice today to Kristen and her experience, and or any of our wives are not in the, Cammie and are not in the room. And there are so many women out there who have their own experience of either disclosing themselves or being disclosed to, or catching their partner or being caught in some sort of sexual transgression. And their stories are going unheard as well. And I think there's going to be room, especially for our listeners down the road, for us to kind of expand the narrative a little bit. And I want to just give voice to that now that this is not the full conversation.
I also want to add one other thing that I heard is really good news in all of your stories. And that is all of you were violating one of the 6 sexual health principles, just constantly.
Yeah.
The honesty one. And there might have been some exploitation at times, and you're certainly not congruent with your values. But let's just focus on the honesty here.
Literally exploitation in the honesty sometimes.
You really talked about that. And I just want to have the listeners know it's really good news when you suffer from crossing one of the 6 sexual health principles. Your life is not supposed to be great when you don't align your life with these 6 sexual health principles. So the fact that you were suffering, it feels terrible. I don't want to be unempathic with that. But it's important that you were not completely fine.
It means we're not psychopaths.
That's right. Because there are some people who can cross these boundaries and emotionally feel little to nothing or don't suffer. And those are people that have more psychological problems, quite frankly. So the fact that this was eating you up, it was acidic to Jake, the distress was horrible. You were imagining all these terrible things. As awful as that sounds, that's an important strength to honor in yourself that you have. That, believe me, I sat with men who don't have much of this, and they have harder lives.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, I agree. I love that, Doug. I as we talked about the 6 principles of sexual health, man, I can't say enough about honesty. Like, it's very clear, and I appreciate you saying in those terms. It is very clear to me that my health, my wellness is much better if I can find that honesty, if I can operate in honesty.
And isn't that good news?
Yeah, you're right. It is good news.
It's not always convenient news, but it's
No. I'm not saying it's welcome news. I'm saying it's good news.
Yeah, it's great news.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, guys. Does anybody have anything else to add before we wrap up? Kristen, we've heard very little from you today. I'd actually love to hear any thoughts that you have had over these last 50 minutes or so of us talking.
I wanted to be really known that the space was filled beautifully with where it needed to be centered. I don't feel like I appreciate it. And I think Doug ended it on a beautiful way of just pointing out that the distress is a strength. And I think leave it there.
Thanks for giving us that space today.
Yeah.
That was really selfless. That was very generous of you.
Well, and as I said, it's not often that just to be able to sit and listen and just listen and observe, and particularly to my partner, but to each of you as my dear friends, it's actually beautiful for me to watch you guys recollect.
Thanks.
And to see, to be honest with you, the parts of the story that were emotional for Jake. Because my narrative at times when we've talked interferes, it dilutes my ability to just see where Jake's pain points were.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed today.
Well, I want to thank you guys for an amazing conversation today. I saw myself in your stories, and Hans and Jake, when you were both sharing your experiences, I was going to say this earlier, but I envisioned a version of myself standing behind a past version of you with like a hand on a shoulder. You know what I mean? And I want to send that message to anybody else who's struggling, that I think you've got 5 people in this room that are standing behind any of you, like whether you're the person being disclosed to, or the person doing the disclosing, or the person being
discovered or the discoverer.
That's the word I was looking for. 5 of us are metaphorically in the room at your back, like encouraging you to like try and access your best self. because we know that on the other end of these really difficult and really painful and challenging conversations can be something truly incredible and amazing, and being able to be your full self and be truly fully seen and accepted in a relationship is just like, there's very little that's like it. So if you appreciated this episode, if it resonated with you, we'd love to hear what you thought. You can like drop a message in the comments, whether it's on YouTube or on Facebook, or just shoot us an email. Let us know. We always love hearing from you. And we'll be back again in about a week. If you want more information or you want to listen to past episodes, you can go to rethinkingpornaddiction.com. And we always appreciate hearing from you. So thank you for tuning in.